This is the third talk in the first part of How to Think Sociologically by Zygmunt, Baumann, and Tim May. I'm using the book as a free inspiration for explaining some keywords in sociology, and they are still talking about how groups meet, and now they are going on to explain how we keep our way of living and the groups going. What mechanism do we really use? And a lot of this can seem like, oh, common sense, we all know that. But we didn't know before sociology really digged into these issues and started giving us data and empirical studies of, is it really that way? Because in the first part, in the introduction, we talked a lot about this, or they talked a lot about that sociology can look like common sense, something, oh, we know how the group relate to each other and how they keep the others out. That's easy. But did we really know that this is consequential? This is what happens every time, and this is how group dynamics are. We know more now because of the sociological studies, and this is what they are trying to tell us, that here you can talk on basis of science and understand that this is something that has been looked into and just not assumptions that you make. And so in this part, this is my third talk in the first part. They are saying, how can a group keep their way of living? And how do they keep it at the same time closed and open to interaction? Because as we said, sociology is about the interaction in non-conventional and in networks that are maybe part of something established or can be established as the result of that interaction. And so how do we keep that social distance while we interact? This is what they are about to take us into. And we mentioned from the last time the Erving Goffman idea of interactions order. That means we interact symmetrically or asymmetrically, and that every interaction happens in a space. And that space is the fields where we have these significant people with privilege and different material resources and different symbolic resources. And these symbolic resources is the main study and focus of Pierre Bourdieu, a very important sociologist who has been for several decades, and he died now, trying to look into these issues of how do these symbolic resources work and how can people use them or lose them. And so here they are talking like when we are keeping our way of life and we feel a bond, and we like it the way we like it, and we have our rules, and the individuals are accepting these rules. Now, we have moved on from talking about the individual who do not want to adapt to those rules of the group and society. Now we are talking about what if another group doesn't want to adapt to the rules of that society. As we said, can be a majority with a way of life, and suddenly you have such a minority that seems different, and what to do about that. And this is something everybody would know, but basically sociology is giving it words. And they talk about the orthodox groups and the Catholic groups, the people who are outsiders and insiders, in groups, out groups. These are the words that are basically part of the sociological jargon that's used here. And so when you have a majority that is controlling because of its culture, ideas, connections, whatever, they can accept a minority on that one condition, that the minority accept the ruling values of the majority. And they want to adapt to it and live accordingly. So this is a sociological trait we find really many places. Sometimes it is very outspoken, and other times it's just there. You can feel it in the air. Whenever you have a place where some people are many and rule and understand the same rules and want them to be as they are and have agreed on them, and they have adapted that way of life that socializes their group or people into that way of life, and they become the many, then if there is a minority, it can be their own people. It can be somebody totally different, doesn't matter. But a minority that do not adhere to these rules, or maybe have some differences. It can be religious, ethnical, national, political, sociological differences in culture and way of living, many different types, but the condition for accepting them is they do not pose a threat to that majority. This is what sociology is telling us. They are like part of society if they can accept that the majority ruling is okay. They do not want to oppose it or take power or grow into a kind of antagonistic pole. You remember from the last talk that we talked about groups can become so symmetrically opposed to each other that it becomes very tense, and it can go out in wars and civil wars and big trouble. So the majority has basically many times this openness in a way to that minority, saying, okay, you can be here and here under these and these circumstances, maybe these special places that are for you. You cannot really get out of them. So they put the limits on these strangers. Why? Because, well, they are not like us. They are from somewhere else. They haven't been invited, or they have taken up some ideas that we really mostly don't like and understand. That can be an ethnic group. The same people in the same African or Asian country who have chosen different religions or political views and ideologies. It can be just cultural preferences. It can be something in the history of that tribe or nation that makes them differ from the others, even though they are living in the same country. And so how to accept them? Many times they are, of course, limited and pushed out. But many times the majority goes into interaction with that group and limit it. Say, okay, we will only interact when it is a trade because they have something to offer. Or we will allow them certain kind of jobs because we need people to be working in those kind of jobs. We know they are there, but they do not get access. They are never invited. They are not part of the way we rule and do things. And so, in a way, they are kept in a distance, even though they are allowed to stay or be part of the nation, maybe just because they can't kick them out. They are born there, they have the same language and culture. Sometimes it's much easier with a minority that comes from the outside and is very, very visible with their language, culture, way of living, language, everything about them is asking the majority to kick them out. They say, well, you're never gonna be like us and you don't want to, you have no place here. And that's what usually happens if things get tense and the majority gets scared. And so the limits, the what can you say, the borders, as Anthony Cohen calls them in his anthropological study. He say the borders are the way the group understands itself. It can only understand itself by these borders. Where do their limits go? What do they accept and not? And these limits can be positive, not always those negative limits that we talk about of limiting our freedom, limiting ourselves, limiting a way of life. That's basically something that has gone on a one string in these times we are in, that every time you talk about limiting or responsibility, it means like you are controlling people out of their basic freedoms. But the limits of a group can be also a way of identification markers, by saying we do not go to these and these activities, we do not do this and that, this is our limits, this is how we think and are. And so in that way of keeping order, by having the limits and the understanding, socialization into the group, the punishment if you do not adhere to the group, they meet that other group that has the same mechanisms. So now we are not facing the individual with the group, as said, but it's the group meeting another group. And they have basically the same dynamics and mechanism. Imagine a small group that we can move from one country far away, who has socialized its members in the same way, like don't do that, teaching in school, significant people, the privileged has decided the rules, but they are different rules, different way of living and eating and doing things. And we put them into, we insert them into a majority group of people who look alike. And they use the same mechanisms in their own social sphere to socialize and let people be. Maybe they can differ in some measures of intensity, as we said earlier, that it's not always in every group that the limits are very close. Sometimes the personal choices can be very, very limited. You cannot choose anything but that party. You cannot choose anything but that religion. You cannot choose anything but that way of living or walking or talking. But in other countries, they can have these social mechanisms of control, but they are more hidden, or they maybe give some space for the personal freedom, and that's what sometimes differs. It's the what can you say, the magic button or the magic roll up, roll down of intensity on how to control society. So let these two groups meet. And then this small group with its minority issues has met this big group, and this big group has reacted by putting limits and borders and calling them the strangers who are unwanted and socially distancing themselves to them because they do not want it. These limits are ways they can interact, because from this limitation, and that has been in the Middle Ages for 1,500 years or more, where several civilizations just knew they had a border they had been fighting over, a culture they have been trying to promote, a way of life they want to expose and expand, and they have some borders. And whenever you cross that border, you know you are in minority land. And so with time, they could trade with each other and work with each other and exchange goods and other things, sometimes become allies against a third force. And the same happens in the groups. So that group you are distancing yourself to can be having the idea that I'm not accepted, but I can actually trade with these people. They will allow me my work because they need it or they like it, or my food tastes good, and so they will let me open a restaurant even though this is Indian paprika that is dominating. And so it can be positive to have these limits and limitations, and that why and in that way make these groups aware of who they are in opposition to the other group, but not necessarily in a kind of hostile way. And this is what they talk about next, is that it develops very quickly, or it becomes like something that goes into that group's ideas that, okay, we have made the limitations because we're different, we are the majority, they're a minority, but they're also a threat. They are growing, people like them, maybe they are popular, maybe they have a mission and they want to spread it, and they are much likable. We don't like that. We have to disturb it, and we have to destroy it, limit it, because we don't want them to get so much influence that we get scared for our way of life. And that's what starts the hostility towards a minority. It's the scaredness. That's why you can go to countries, even in the free West and anywhere on earth, and see that some groups are going along much easier than other groups. And some kind of people are trying to find their way in a much easier, understanding, accepting way to the majority than the others. Why? Perhaps they are not waving the flags and not putting focus on themselves as very, very different and very strange and very, very threatening. And the others are not. They are actually very much outward going, have a mission, have an opposition, maybe criticizing society in a loudly way, and they can be part of the nation itself. It doesn't need to be a group from the outside, as said. And so that ambivalent situation that this group comes in has been subject of study for those anthropologists and sociologists. And so, as they say here, the group can feel attacked and being like insurgent by people from the outside who want to take over, or maybe just want to be part of it. And why do they want that? And so the guy or the person who is a neophyte, like the guy who converts from one thing to another, or the nouveau rich, the one who suddenly gets rich and gets into that exclusive club of privileged people, what do they want? Can we accept it? Does this person or family belong here? And it can be someone who had social escalation, who suddenly came from like migrant parents who are just ordinary workers, and whoa, this person is one top leader in a company or in politics or in social life and has a lot of power and money, and whoa, where did that come from? Can we accept it? And the refusal of that kicks in that majority. And imagine now a whole different scenario, that the same people who are the majority starts thinking like that inwardly, like when they see someone from a social class that hasn't been associated with rule, they start refusing that. And there is a very fine quote of the actor who just died in the movie Under Suspicion, where he is opposing Morgan Freeman and Monica Bellucci, and he's taken into that station and questioned by these two very unsatisfied and critical officers who just want to see him hang or burn or something. My famous actor we all love, Gene Hackman. He just died last month. And so when they go after him, he starts defending himself and using the rhetoric, and he says something. He says, people, when they see somebody rich, they do not care because that's out of their group. But if someone from themselves, who should just be like them in destiny and in what they have, when this person becomes rich, everybody starts getting jealous and refusing that person's shift in life. And so he's actually just saying, I have become a successful lawyer, I am very rich, I'm very known, and I changed my society layer, in the old days called classes. Today it's called layers, social layers. And so people from that social layer can accept that if you come from a family of kings or very rich oligarchs or something like that, well, you are in a different layer altogether, and they can accept that you're not part of the reference group that we are in. But if you are that and you move from it upwards or downwards, that can also trigger a lot of bad associations to you in the group, and you can become isolated, or people can have this bitterness towards you and just want to see you fall. That happens also a lot. So in that position, you can get the groups meeting each other, but keeping distance and having borders. And sometimes they open up the borders and say, okay, listen, we integrate you fully in this society, you can have the same equal rights, and you have the same human rights as us, no limitation. Many other places, they do not. They keep the limits. They open up a little bit, or to some extraordinary persons, but the rest has to stay where they are, and understand the limitation that's on them, and they should not be scary to the majority, or else they will get into trouble, because the majority is keeping a close eye on where this is going. And the same thing they say, that in this book, also quoting different sociologists, but saying that if someone from the majority does a crime or a troublesome thing that is unacceptable, well, they don't pull it up as a big, huge something they have to deal with. It becomes more trifle. Yeah, he was just out of line, because every group refers to itself as the right one. Our way of life is the original and right one, and the one that is dominating. That's why it's the good one. And so if someone from the minority group does something, this is being put under a close attention and maybe blown up in the media. Look at those people. They cannot understand the society rules and laws, and they cannot adhere to them and follow them, and they always want to make trouble. They are difficult. They shouldn't be here. They are a danger. And so the rhetoric can easily be blown up to become a rhetoric of hatred and animosity and hostile way of treating these minorities. Otherwise, it is the separation, called in sociology for segregation, that is the ruler of the social life. Basically, every minority lives in segregation from the majority, because people go together in reference groups, as we said before, and find themselves where they are most wanted and can identify themselves. So very naturally, if your group is from a certain ethnicity or has a certain religion or background, you go with that group, and then you become stronger, and you meet, and you have this corporation and living together, and so does the other group. But because they are much more or stronger or has the power, they make this segregation towards each other. So segregation has been and is the basic main line, because then we can uphold what's called status quo. The situation is unchanged and must stay unchanged. And if it doesn't, as said, if something feels threatening from that minority, well, then they will find the mistakes, they will charge against them, and they will use a lot of mechanisms, social mechanisms, to maybe make that hostility become something they will fight against or send someone to fight against. And that majority individuals will start looking at that minority with a lot of disgust, contempt, rejection, like looking down at mentality, critical thinking, only limited contact, as limited as possible. And so you have the barriers of pre-typing and prejudges and the unwill against this group. They are not like us, and they can never be, and they shouldn't be, and they shouldn't have the access as we have. They are strange, they are difficult, they are backwards, they are not part of society. A lot of these labels can come up, and sometimes people become creative in using them. But the group feels it has to do that, because now the segregation cannot uphold anymore. If the minority feels threatened, they can also lash out in the same way, trying to gain more space, access, open up to some more space to be part of society, or gain control with other parts of society, and by that way going into a symmetrical segregation, not a symmetrical one. And that's what triggers the separation and sometimes civil wars in the worst end of it. But if it's not a civil war, that triggers a lot of misunderstandings, clashes, two separate entities that really can't live together. So whenever the segregation cannot be upheld, either it's because the limits are opened up and they are welcomed in. There's an attempt of integration, letting them have a different identity and way of life, but integrating them in the ways of power. Maybe that's like we have in the secular states. They do not care what religion and ethnicity you have, as long as you adhere to the laws that controls everybody. And by doing so, you're going to give up some of your religious laws and some of your ways and traditions, because if they contradict the law, you have to put them aside. This is the condition for opening up and letting you in. And some will go with that, and some will stay in total segregation. If you study the religious groups who are minorities in places they do not belong, especially the history of the Jewish people, you will find a lot of these traits that sometimes during the Roman Empire they could divide among themselves and go say, okay, we will integrate in the Roman society, and some went all the way to become totally assimilated and against the old values. So that can happen as well, the shift from the minority to becoming identical with the majority in every way, and that way getting accepted and being part of that. They find the new golden way of life, or something they like more. And sometimes it's just a kind of integration where you put something aside and you go compromising, and then you get accepted in a limited way. So the barriers are there, and they are healthy. They need to keep things clear, and the segregation is the rule of the realm. But when segregation can't be upheld anymore, and those minorities are claiming more or clashing, then it becomes hostile, and then it can be used or misused to go back to status quo of who has the power and who has not. And sometimes it can lead to ethnic cleansing. It can lead to the deportations. It can lead to mass deportations, or building a fence or special territories for people who do not fit in and who do not want to fit in. And so that segregation can be in the physical way, in the space around you, in town, where you have an area called a ghetto, another area called Chinatown, a third area called the Far East, the fourth area called people who love ice, and the fifth area are for us who like chocolate. and we are all like, okay, together the taxis are driving between the areas, there is some kind of peace, but the limits are there because when we finish work we all go to our certain area. And that's why when you go to some of the movies, I like Die Hard 3, this is one of my favorites, and he is asked by Simon's brother, that guy who wants to revenge his brother's death in the first movie. He asked him to go to Harlem Street 105th and carry a sign saying I hate niggers. And just by being in that area is a trigger of those so-called niggers to react. They don't like white people in that area. What is he doing? And carrying over that a sign disrespecting their values and their group, well, that could trigger something very dangerous for that white guy. And so we see it in these examples, many examples from movies and stories as well, that when you move from one place to another, it's like the old story of Mark Twain, leaving your layer of society, your class, or what is it called? Great Expectations, where you have the meeting between two cultures in this beautiful story as well. And many stories we can talk about, but there is this spatial segregation. This is one part. You are spatially segregated. The rich people have their quarters. People in Hollywood are the stars above everyone else, and the poor people are in a totally different place, maybe a slum or something. And then there are people in between, on the borders. And so this is a spatial segregation. And in that way, there is not much likelihood to meet with those people whom you can't understand and can understand you, and would reflect badly on your way of life. And so the people want just to be with their reference groups. That's a very natural thing. And sometimes that spatial, segregation can be a kind of mental segregation, symbolic segregation. Like when you have a party and you only invite people from your reference group. Well, okay, we're in the same town, but we never meet, and we never get together. And that's a way of also segregating people mentally, without necessarily like putting borders. You cannot enter this part of town. You cannot sit in the same bus. That's what happened to some groups in the past, where they couldn't get on the same bus and sit on the seats. We have the Rosa Parks revolution in the 50s in the United States, because they broke these kind of borders. That was the spatial segregation that took over and was very harsh, because the white people felt threatened by these growing numbers of blacks who are now also being able to speak well and communicate to the people and organize. That really triggered a lot of alarms. So if you see it in this sociological perspective, you become more observant and say, okay, I understand that the dynamics are not good here. They are going in a bad tension, direction of a bad tension. And so if you don't do that kind of spatial segregation, you can always do the mental one, and that's very, very widespread. People from, as said, certain layers or backgrounds, or the group who doesn't like the other group, they segregate mentally, and even though they can come into the areas, nobody is forbidding you to go to the areas where the rich people are living. You can drive there and drive around, but suddenly maybe the police will stop you, say, what are you doing here? You don't look like you fit in or you live here. And but there is a mental segregation. You will never be invited to one of these people's houses or parties. So it's about putting borders, denying access, and minimizing the ambivalence in that spatial relation that you are having with these people. Another way they are looking at this as well is sometimes we put limitations without hostility. It's like when you are in a big town and you are a stranger there, because many people, even though you refer to them as your group, it can be from the same group and nation and culture, but you do not know them personally. That's what we said in the other talk, that if you are In a group, there is face and non-face. So many of the people you can put face on, these are those who are directly in your reference group and you have some relation to. And the others, yeah, you belong to them as a nation, as a group, as a language, as a culture, but you do not meet them in everyday life. And so when you go in a big town, they are generally characterized, this is what they're looking at here. Now they finished looking at the first thing about the hostility between majority and minority, and looking at if you are in a big town, and in some kind of way you are just also a minority or a majority, and you go about not making much notice of yourself, and maybe people won't notice you either. And that's what they call polite unattention. It's like you are walking on the street and you do not exchange hellos and looks and talks and smiles with everyone walking around you. If you, in comparison, go to the rural areas or the old areas of the small settlements, or people were living in small agrarian ways, they will be much more likely to say hello if they meet you, even if they meet you 10 times. I've seen that when I was in Greenland and some parts also of Denmark, in the rural areas where small villages live isolated or close together. People have more tendency to know everyone else and say hello and be in contact, and in that way you have a significance that's not there when you are living in the town. And so the town makes everything what they call abstract. You are on an abstraction level. You understand yourself as part of this nation, this culture, this ethnicity, this group, this political rule, this economy, this way of life, but there is no connection. And that polite unawareness, as it's called by Irving Hoffman, that very clever sociologist who are looking into these issues, is a technique we use to go by when we are surrounded by strangers, even though you belong to the same group, and you do not exchange all the things you would have done. And so, in a way, we can be very close physically, but we can spiritually and mentally be very far away. So that spatial segregation has become the mental segregation, spiritual segregation. You are in the same train, same bus, same metro, ship, whatever, but you do not have anything to do with each other. And if something goes wrong, you cannot depend on everybody reacting to you. Maybe they'll just look at you and ask someone to call for the ambulance or the police or whatever is needed, and they will not insert themselves in that, even though you belong to the same group and nation and culture, because you're a stranger to them and they are strangers to you. And so they would not invest part of themselves in the bigger counts, and that's what makes the anonymity go over to loneliness, and loneliness becomes the curse of the time. And that's why sociologists have seen these tendencies whenever urbanization happened and towns grew into millions and millions. Things become like a jungle, and everyone in his small entity and reference group, and the others are basically strangers. You do not meet them. This is the non-face group of who you go and meet. And so this anonymity can also be positive, because you're also left to yourself. You cannot have this anonymity like when I lived in Greenland in a small town, and everybody knew each other and everybody could see you wherever you went and came. And if you just found somebody you want to take home or you talk to, everybody would notice. You cannot like hide. But in a big town, you have this possibility of, in a way, being yourself more, and maybe living with yourself without always needing to confirm. And as you remember, we talked about always in dialogue between yourself and your surroundings. That's socialization process. That's ongoing. You always looked into, can I do this? Can I not? Is it acceptable? Is it not? Can I get away with it? I would like to try it, but where? And so on. And so in small towns, it's more difficult. And that's why you lose more of your anonymity, but you become more significant to those people. There is faces you can rely on. In the big towns, it's greater anonymity. It gives you a space to be yourself and have your freedom, but at the same time, you will lose the relation, the face, and that's why you will basically be left to yourself as an invisible stranger who who no one knows and have to react to. And that's part of what George Simmel, the German sociologist, had noticed and talked about when he described towns and how they work, and the city life basically, and the abstract thinking, how they go together. And so people become more abstract even in the way they think about things, because it becomes just numbers and words. It's not concrete. You do not talk about concrete issues and people as in the same way. You talk about things in abstract ways, if that makes sense. And so there is a win side and a lose side of the city life, as he says, and that's what can be like shifting when you are there. And then they make a notice on this, saying, well, with the growth of cities and people moving there to find their anonymity and freedom and personal life and just being detached from everyone else in the same group, it's like we are making more space for our playing ground. If you remember in one of the earlier chapters, they were and parts, they were talking about that sometimes we feel suffocated by the group's rules, and the group does not give us that way of trying to be different as we want to. And so whenever we become aware of that, we want to find the places where we can have this freedom more than we think. Like personally, I cannot live in a town like that anymore. It's different. It's difficult because I've been living in Greenland for so many years and been used to a lot of nature, a little group of people. We are all significant. We know each other, and it has what it has of good and bad sides. And so relating to that big stone jungle as the Annaluk, the lady who followed Knud Rasmussen to New York in one of his journeys in 1911, I think, she when she arrived there with the ship, her first expression was a stone jungle. And so for her, this was unimaginably different and difficult to relate to. Where has she ended? Where is it? And what is it? She cannot relate to anything. There is nothing but stone and stone and stone and gray faces walking by, not knowing or cheering or learning to know about each other. But what these people are doing is the anonymity, and that distancing to the strangers they do not know, and they gain their freedom, and whatever they like and tendencies they have in life, it's accepted to go and do it with people who are like you. So if you like to go and watch some football game or dance or sit and meditate or go and pray all day, or you want to go nude on the beach, if society rules accept that you can have this subculture and it doesn't feel threatened by it, you will be allowed to do it. As long as you adhere to the general rules, as said before, as long as you accept that the way it is the way it should be. And so you do not come from the nudist beach and try to topple the mayor, or come from your prayer site and want to topple the government, and so on. And so if you can be in that, you will be given the space to find your freedom and go do what your tendencies are, and that way realize yourself, as they say, or realize your dreams or your lusts or whatever you like. And many people will be scared and shock their head about this. What is going on? And so they would like to have a society where rules are more stringent and more close, because everybody should be put in line so this does not go up in a kind of a dissolution. It dissolves in the end. If everyone is going to be more and more himself and less the group, then we will not be relating to each other. And that's the basic threat that has been to especially several parts of the world, that has been given more and more liberties to people to be something else, because everyone has to fulfill himself and gets more and more self-centered or centered about some things the others do not follow. And by doing so, they are giving space and giving way to people and society not to relate to each other in the end, and the majority will dissolve. And a new minority will take over the role of the majority and maybe put new rules and new relations that can be stronger or strengthen it. Or the majority will make those reforms and say, well, that was the line. Now we have to go back to to being together, being that company we were before, and the garrison will kick in. You remember the garrison we mentioned from Freud, that voice inside you of what to do, what not to do, that will become stronger, and it will be the police of your mind. And so in that way, you will keep the group and the herd and the people together. But if you do so, as said, if you do so, you will suffocate, maybe feel threatened by the minority or the individual, and so totally erase his or her identity and make them part of the gray mass. You are like everyone else. Do not think special of yourself. You are not that unique as you think. Stop bringing your face up above others, or your voice outside the chorus. Just be part of like everyone else. Be normal, man. That's what they tell you. On the other side, if they leave it to be and everyone is realizing himself, there is a great danger of loss of morals. And this is what they mention here. All this I've explained now is my explanations and not their talk. But it's all leading to it. It's all part of it, and you can associate. But one thing they are mentioning is that the human relation will lose its ethical character. What does that mean? Because if everyone is detached and anonymous and not relating to others, you do not have an ethical obligation, or you don't feel you have. Maybe some people have the idea that I'm a citizen and he's a citizen, and there's something wrong with him on a train. Let's act and help and be the good Samaritans. But many people will just look and will just be surprised and will try not to interfere, not to mingle, even though it's one of their own people, like abstractly. But for them, it's a stranger. So when they go home and say, there was a stranger on the train and this happened. What did you do? Nothing. I kept myself out of it. I didn't have time to answer questions if the police came or something like that. You won't find that in the rural areas. And so the ethical consequence of this can be the loss of obligation and moral towards each other. And that is something they are very focused on in half a page or more, saying that it becomes something we do not relate to. That these people do not obligate us to be responsible towards them because they are strangers and thereby not necessarily those we have to give attention to. And that can, in a very, very slide that can be dangerous and easy and hidden, take us towards what they call from the polite unattention to the moral moral carelessness and the heartlessness and the lack of responsibility towards the other. And that's a way of dissolving society and the group and the socialization. Yeah, I hope it was enlightening and it was like giving sense on how the groups keep themselves strong and use the borders, as they call them, and the segregation as a way of keeping everything in checks and balances. Next time or next talk will be about everything that binds and connects the relationship that we can have together, and the loyalty that comes out of that, and how they interact and the dynamics in them. And from this relationship, it goes into groups and organizations and how they interact and gather themselves in a rational, understandable way. This will be for a next talk. Thanks very much. Have a good day, whoever you are, wherever you are.